Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series Wearing Power Armor to Magic School. If you are new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 4, A Table of Misfits. A princess, a real, honest-to-God princess. My mind had struggled to register that. The past half an hour alone was just about enough to overwhelm my head with an inundation of experiences completely removed from my reality. From magic to mythical races to talking birds and an entirely alien civilization that I had no context for. Everything here was just about pushing the limits of my sanity. But in a good way. A part of me thought to myself as I felt a mix of conflicting feelings bubbling up to the surface. There was an intrusive excitement that came with the novelty of it all, of actually being in a place that should have been reserved for the pages of a fantasy novel, or the fleeting hours of an ED&D session. It was sickeningly nostalgic and provocatively exciting. But I had to keep it in check. The reality I was in was nothing like those fantasies, despite my deepest desires to believe it. I quickly pushed aside those intrusive thoughts as I attempted to focus on the task at hand, which, at this point, was just trying my best to fit in. Something that was much easier said than done, given the obvious barrier that was the suit. You know, where I came from, stories usually start off with a knight saving the princess, and not the other way around, I managed out with a chuckle, attempting to break the ice with my own off-brand humor, which I think worked. It was difficult to really tell with a face that was dominated by a beak rather than a mouth or even a snout. Combine this with what was perhaps years of whatever manners or social training Thassia had received as a royal, and it was clear that I'd have to be laser-focused on all of our discussions, or risk being lost in the sea of social cues that existed for royalty and nobility. Well, you'd be happy to know that those preconceived notions are quite well and alive here in the Nexus, as it is in most adjacent realms, the princess began. Her voice was sharp but rich, somewhere between a parrot's mimicry and an owl's deep hooting. There was a certain restraint in the way she spoke, even with a little piece of banter. Are you, the princess continued, her eyes clearly fixating on my armor rather than the person inside it. If you'll excuse my presumptuous line of questioning, of course. But am I correct in assuming that you're a knight of your realm? Perhaps a squire, given how knighthoods are most usually bestowed well beyond the academy's age of matriculation. I blinked for a few moments, feeling as if I was thrust into an interview or social function reserved for the director and her military brass. If this were any other situation, I would have just been done with it and answered with the first thing that came to mind. But this wasn't like any other situation. So whatever answer I gave had to be heavily audited. How would I even begin to explain the concept of the ROTC cadet to someone from an era that didn't even have proper standing army? Or did they? Wait, did they have standing armies in medieval era? Could the medieval era even be used as a point of reference for Nexus and whatever adjacent realms were? There certainly wasn't anything in the massive social integration and operations manual that could have prepared me to face-to-face interaction with royalty of all things. To the credit of the SIOP's author, though, no one could ever expect any of this. Knights and squires aren't really a thing in my world anymore, actually, I replied confidently, puffing my chest up as if to compensate for my utter lack of understanding for what constituted proper social etiquette here. Though that probably didn't do much given the suit was in the way of any real body language to be read. This answer, however, proved to be lacking, as the princess raised a single brow in response, leaning forward in her seat as she allowed my words to linger in the air. It was as if she was going through and dissecting the implications of my claims methodically, her eyes not even making the effort to hide the analytical mind behind it, a mind that was more likely going to throw some curveball of a question back my way. A realm without knights and squires, eh? The wolf-looking creature finally interjected, completely cutting off what was probably going to be a carefully worded line of questioning from the princess. This caught me off guard, as my attention was now squarely focused on this hulking mass of a creature. If Thassia was a princess, what I assumed was a member of a royal household, Then what right did this wolf have to interrupt her like that? The only assumption I could make was that perhaps he was a higher up the ladder than she was, and that thought alone was definitely something to be worried about. Yes, that's correct, I answered curtly, making sure to balance my dislike of his interruption with caution regarding his place in the social pecking order. He scoffed back as he sized me up again. His predatory eyes managed to lock with my own underneath those opaque lenses, sending shivers down my spine. Yeah, no, not buying it. You got a better cover story, or are you going to be dealing with a spineless liar or a charlatan for the rest of your school year? He boldly announced, catching me off guard as I noticed the princess mellowing back into the background as the tension grew. Part of me wanted to avoid confrontation, just to explain away the situation carefully. Another part of me knew, however, that yielding softly wouldn't help matters, especially not with someone who was clearly trying to assert themselves like this. A distant part of me wanted to demonstrate the utter obsolescence of knights in shining armor by putting out my sidearm. This was, of course, a distant thought for a reason. Maybe another time. There's our big words to throw around, pal, I spoke, letting what little of blind front I was putting up crumble away as I leaned in closer towards the table. You called that much from one sentence alone, did you? Listen, I don't take too kindly to being called a liar before I've even been properly introduced to a person throwing those punches. So why don't we clear up the air a little here? Start with names and introductions, then address whatever lies you think I'm spouting, I offered, trying my best to de-escalate the situation, but also making it clear that I wasn't about to take his crap lying down. I'll start. I'm Emma Brooker. What's your name? Thelman, Prince Thelman Havenbrook of the Lupinar court. The Lupinar spoke with little in the way of pomp and circumstance, but rather with an air of underlying aggression that saw his maw curl up into a snarl, with his rows of canine teeth brought to bear. It's actually mercenary, Prince Thelman Havenbrook of the Lupinar court. The diminutive lizard piped up, finally deciding to enter the conversation, his eyes facing me with equal parts confusion, anxiety, and genuine intrigue. I must apologize for my ill-mannered friend here. This is very much typical of Lupinar court nobility, and even more so with their royalty, he countered, as if trying to vie for my attention, as it was clear now that all eyes were firmly on me. You will watch your tongue, Eleanor, or you'll find it, and the rest of the head attached to it, missing from your shoulders by night's end. Thelman shifted his aggression towards the small lizard, who fell short of impressed, let alone intimidated by the Lupinar's antics. Let us not beat around the bush, Eleanor spoke, completely ignoring Thelman's threats and focusing on the line of questioning squarely at me. Squires and knights, court etiquette and chivalry, lies and whatnot, all of it can be discussed later. What we need to know right now, his tone softened as he paused in the middle of his sentence to mutter out something under his breath. Something which caused my HUD to once again be assaulted by a barrage of warnings. Alert. Localized search of mana radiation detected, 225% above background radiation levels. Warnings that disappeared within a few seconds, just as it had been with Thasia's use of magic. However, unlike the chair, I didn't notice any difference to me, or my immediate surroundings. That was until I noticed that my long-range listening sensors were all but dead, as it felt as if there was an acoustic bubble that had enveloped our table. I assumed this probably worked both ways, so while we couldn't hear what was happening on the other side of the bubble, so too would our conversations be completely inaudible to the rest of the room. Is what you're doing here in a full suit of armor? Armor that is clearly concealing your mana fields. Tell us, Emma of Earth's realm, have your kind developed a way to hide sickness of mana field taint? Eleanor, please. Quiet, princess. If we are to move forward as a peer group, we mustn't hide such pressing matters from one another, the lizard snapped, cutting Thasia off, as it became clear to me that these two were not above knocking her down every possible turn despite her royal rank. It sickened me to my stomach. That must be the only reason behind your ridiculous insistence on wearing a full suit of armor to the academy. Why else would someone try to mask their mana fields? In fact, I don't even think there's anyone underneath that suit at all. Are you perhaps a golem or some artifice slave soul trapped in the metal? There's no other explanation as to why you are able to sit there, exuding nothing, like a lifeless suit of armor. The lizard turned around to face Thelman, Then Thasia, who sat there with a look of growing concern. You all feel it. I know you can. There's no mana field within or around that thing. It's like a slave is sitting at our table. How else would this thing feel so lifeless and dead? He reiterated, forcing Thasia to slink back further into her seat as the Lupanar grew quieter and quieter. I'm just saying what's in everyone's mind, he quickly added. What the heck is your problem? I shot back through my vocoder, the volume alone causing the diminutive lizard to slink firmly back against his seat. I stood up, the full 7 foot 4 inches height of my suit easily surpassing the lizard's height twice over. Whether it was the stress of the whole situation, or the fact that my hands were practically splintering the table at the seams, Thasia finally snapped back. Enough! It was at this point that my senses reported another surge of magical radiation. Except this time, it wasn't capping out or remaining fixed at a certain percentage over the background radiation, but it was fluctuating wildly. Soon after the variable fluctuations of mana field energy, I felt the audio nullifying bubble around us pop, as the sounds of the rooms were once more audible, forcing all of us to step back from each other's throats, before I heard yet more gossip from afar, this time targeting towards the avian. Seems like the Tainted Princess has had a little breakdown. I'm surprised they even sent her to the academy. Only the gods and goddesses know when her taint will overwhelm her mana fields. It will spell death for everyone here. May her peer group find solace in their quick and timely demise. Wait, group? I parroted out, which garnered the attention of everyone at the table. Are we? No, so your knight in shining armor finally gets it. Yes, our group. The table you sit with at orientation will dictate your peer group for the rest of the academic year. The lizard hissed back as he refused to meet my gaze, instead focusing on the domed dishes in front of him. I believe this is why Prince Thelman Havenbrook and Lord Ulinar Rulari here are currently on edge. It is a huge risk for the 3 of us to be paired with a being which we lack any knowledge of. As a result of this, and in addition to the great number of stressors we each faced prior to our arrival at the academy, there exists a great deal of tension which both Thelman and Ulinar seem to be resolving with fear, anger, and frustration. For that I must apologize, Emma of Earthrealm. The avian gave me a slightest hint of a head nod that I reciprocated in kind. I wanted so desperately to punt the lizard across the room, perhaps even knock Thelman down a peg, but I knew they were probably acting out of stress. I could empathize. Conflict escalation was what was keeping me back, although it was a bit harder to do with the lizard. It's fine. I get it. I literally just survived being turned into a pile of liquefied goop just as a half an hour ago. We all have our issues to contend with, I sighed, placing both hands on the table in front of me. I'm willing to answer any questions you have, but let's try to be a bit more civil, okay? I offered, putting that olive branch out there, as the wolf seemed to be willing to play ball, nodding and leaning forward. The lizard has a point, he began. We need to know why the armor, Emma. His tone was far more subdued now, but still carried a certain severity behind it. I looked everyone dead in the eye, and despite them all being unable to see my eyes underneath the lenses, I tried my best to maintain eye contact all the same. Part of me wondered if I should evade the question, but I knew that if this really was to be my group for the rest of the year, healthy communication would be key. If I take this off, I die, I stated bluntly, eliciting reactions I more or less expected. Dramatic, Ulinar whispered under his breath. The wolf, however, didn't seem to mind as he gestured for me to continue with a single nod of his head. Go on. I'm not sure if the academy told you this. Judging from how gossipy this place is, I gestured to the tables behind us to illustrate my point. It would be kind of surprising if you guys hadn't heard, but the previous human student who tried to cross the threshold just ended up melted. The suit is all that stands in the way between me and that fate. I shuddered, a tinge of concern dripping with every word, as just admitting the fact made me actually aware of just how precarious my position here was. The whole room looked so normal, yet for all intents and purposes, it was effectively a vacuum of space to me. How is that possible? Thasia began, only to have a line of questioning cut short by a series of 3 loud bumps, each thump reverberating louder and louder as all eyes shot towards the part of the room that I could have sworn didn't exist just a moment prior. A quick look at my HUD revealed that a small spike in radiation was detected, hinting at the fact that there was probably some magic involved with all of this. What appeared in front of us was an entire stage, elevated about 5 feet above the floor and connected to the floor via a series of levitating marble staircases. "Attention students to be from the Nexus and adjacent realms alike. The orientation is about to commence," a voice echoed throughout the room, belonging to none other than the blue-robed professor, who just apparated alongside a group of 25 similarly cloaked humanoids who stood at attention behind him. Each of them seemed to belong to a different race. Most seemed elvish, but a scant few stood out as draconic and even a cat-like. My eyes focused on one figure, however. A tall, graceful, regal-looking elf, draped in a cloak that was pure white, so white, in fact, that I could swear it practically radiated light itself. Something told me that this was more than likely the man in charge of this whole operation. "The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts welcomes each and every one of you," the white-robed figure spoke, moving forwards to completely overshadow Vanavan. "For those of you who do not know, I am Dean Eltaran Ra Astar, the 2592nd Dean of this academy, and the fourth in my lineage to hold such an honor," the Dean continued, as the rest of the professors behind him fell in line, standing in 3 distinct rows, with the black-robed Multoroy and blue-robed Vanavan standing immediately behind him. "Now, I expect most of you to have read up in your history, but because we are blessed with a new realmer amongst our ranks, the Dean's eyes shifted towards me, and so did the entire room and 3 rows of professors. Thanks to the suit, no one could gauge my reaction, but underneath, I was practically melting alive. "I deem it best to provide a brief summary of the significance of this academy to the balance that is the Nexus realm accords. In the beginning, there was nothing but the Nexus itself. This Nexus, however, wasn't one of any of us today would recognize, for it existed as a world of pure mana, where the gods existed in peace and harmony. This harmony, however, was not fated to last, for out of this realm of mana came another being, a god in everything but name. His taint and miasma infected the realm, and out of this taint came sin, and out of the sin came discord, and from that came the corruption of the old gods, and the eventual war in the heavens which forever shattered the perfection that was the old Nexus. Yet from the ashes came the seeds of new life. The adjacent realms, born as but an afterthought, without purpose, without direction. Conversely, forged from the wisdom of the new gods came the new Nexus, a creation of love and commitment. A commitment to forge a better world of enlightened beings which comprise up most of the Academy's faculty and staff. The Dean gestured to himself and the staff which stood unflinchingly behind him. The Academy was constructed to bridge the gap that exists between the Nexus and the adjacent realms, to teach and enlighten those with the gift of mana, and to elevate the adjacent realms from its natural tendencies of barbarism to one of civility. We exist to bring the enlightenment of the gods to the lightless. The Dean's monologue was capped off with an unwavering smile, one that only grew in confidence as he went on. Students from the Nexus and adjacent realms, by order of the Transgression Accords of 10,092, under the blessings of all adjacent realms and approved by the holy decree of His Majesty the King, I hereby announce the official start of this academic school year and the induction of the class of 2919. Yet, instead of the cheers and claps of any other such announcement, what I saw before me was a room filled with dread. "He can't do that," I heard several voices whisper throughout the room. "The orientation still hasn't even begun," a few more spoke, before silence eventually dominated the room. The formerly chatty and well-composed crowd had all but lost their composure at the proclamation, and what's more, quite a few began to fidget with their uniforms, specifically with something hidden underneath them. Murmurs were heard from the faculty on stage as Vanavan stepped forward to the Dean, whispering something into his ear, which only elicited a most dismissive of glares as he was forced back in line in the most passive-aggressive way I could imagine. The whole room reeked of something having gone terribly out of step, like the carefully choreographed and rehearsed lines of the past few minutes had been derailed without warning. "So," the Dean continued, the warmth in his smile was still there, yet I couldn't help but feel that it was completely out of touch with the mood in the room. Without further ado, we should get on with the ceremony of scholarly rites. The tone of his voice hinted that this was a request or something optional, yet the way he phrased it made it clear that this wasn't just a passing remark. It was a demand that had clearly spooked all of the students in the room, and had caused the few that were fidgeting with whatever it was beneath their cloaks to begin uttering murmurs that caused small localized spikes in mana radiation around themselves. Mel Torroy stepped forward, his eyes gazing across each and every one of the students in the room with a piercing, almost unfeeling look of apathy as he held something in his hands. It was a leather-bound case, an object that seemed too plain to be something issued by a school that exuded wealth and extravagance. The first student who steps forward for the ceremony will receive 20 points credited to their peer group, 30 points to their house, and 50 extra points to whichever class they see fit. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.